Today, we're diving into a landmark Supreme Court case, Nautilus versus Biosig. And what's so interesting is that it wasn't about some flashy new invention. No, this case was about the very words we use to describe inventions, and it completely changed the rules for how clear a patent has to be.
So it really all boils down to one fundamental question. How precise do you have to be when you write down what your invention is? To get legal protection, where exactly is the line between clear enough and just too vague?
All right, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the actual technology involved. Then we'll zero in on the specific words that caused all the trouble. After that, we'll unpack the old legal standard, the Supreme Court's new rule, why they made that change, and finally, what it all means for innovation today.
Okay, let's set the scene. The legal fight was between two companies. On one side, you have Nautilus, the company that makes exercise equipment, and on the other, Biosig Instruments, which held a patent for a heart rate monitor.
This whole thing went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which handed down its decision on June 2, 2014. And get this, it was unanimous. Every single justice agreed. The opinion was written by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which really signaled that the court wanted to send a powerful, unified message about patent clarity.
What's pretty amazing is that this entire legal battle, which climbed through multiple federal courts, really hinged on the meaning of just 5 words buried inside one of Biosig's patent claims.
So what did this invention actually do? Well, it solved a really common problem. If you've ever used a heart rate monitor on a piece of gym equipment, you know the electrical signals from your moving muscles, that's called EMG, can interfere with the electrical signal from your heart, the ECG. Biosig's invention cleverly used 2 sets of electrodes to filter out that muscle noise, which gives you a much more accurate heart rate.
And here they are, the 5 words at the center of everything. In spaced relationship with each other. That's how the patent described the electrodes. And the multi-million-dollar question was, what does that actually mean? Is that description clear enough to be legally valid?
Now, the lower courts were completely split on this. First, the district court said the phrase was indefinite, way too vague, and invalidated the patent claim. But then the case went to the Federal Circuit, which specializes in patent law, and they reversed the decision, saying the phrase was perfectly fine. That kind of direct conflict is exactly why the Supreme Court decided to step in and settle the debate.
You see, this disagreement wasn't just about 5 words. It exposed a much deeper fight over the right way to test if a patent is too vague. The Federal Circuit had been using its own standard for a long time, and Nautilus basically showed up and said, your whole standard is broken. Let's compare the 2 standards, because they are worlds apart. The Federal Circuit's old rule said a claim is only invalid if it's insolubably ambiguous. Basically, it had to be so confusing, it was impossible to figure out. It was a very high bar. Nautilus argued for a much tougher test. They said, look, if experts in the field can't agree on what the patent covers, if there's reasonable uncertainty, that should be enough to call it indefinite.
The core of Nautilus's case was this idea of a zone of uncertainty. They argued that the old, lenient standard allowed patent holders to get away with fuzzy, ill-defined boundaries, and this creates a chilling effect on innovation. Why? Because competitors get scared to develop anything even close to that fuzzy area for fear of getting sued. So instead of promoting new ideas, these vague patents were actually scaring innovators away.
Well, the Supreme Court heard these arguments about ambiguity and its chilling effect, and they agreed. Unanimously, they rejected the Federal Circuit's old standard and set up a new, stricter test for everyone to follow.
So, the Supreme Court vacated, or erased, the Federal Circuit's decision. But, and this is a key point, they didn't actually rule on whether Biosig's patent was valid in the end. Instead, they sent the case back down to the lower court with a new set of instructions, telling them to reevaluate the patent using the new standard.
And here it is. This is the new rule that defines the case. The court declared that a patent is invalid for being indefinite if its claims don't tell a person skilled in that field what the invention covers with reasonable certainty. That phrase, reasonable certainty, is the new gold standard.
So why did the court land on reasonable certainty? Justice Ginsburg's opinion really walks us through the logic, and it all comes down to striking a delicate balance between the rights of the inventor and the good of the public.
This quote from Justice Ginsburg just nails it. A patent isn't a private secret, it's a public announcement. It has to act like a clear fence around a piece of property. It tells everyone what's off limits so that other innovators know exactly what territory is still open for them to explore and build upon.
The court was really trying to find a careful middle ground here.
They came down hard on the need for public notice and completely rejected the old, insolubly ambiguous test because it just allowed for too much imprecision. At the same time, the court was realistic. They acknowledged you can't always describe things with mathematical precision. Language just has its limits. So reasonable certainty became that sweet spot. Not absolute perfection, but clear enough for an expert to know what's going on.
Now, this new reasonable certainty standard wasn't just some abstract legal idea. It had immediate, real-world consequences for how inventors, patent lawyers, and the whole patent system works.
The ruling created a ripple effect. First, it totally raised the bar, shifting the burden onto patent applicants to write much clearer claims right from the start. And second, it sent a clear message to the U.S. Patent Office that they needed to be tougher gatekeepers and apply a more rigorous standard during their examinations.
And the ultimate goal behind all of this? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Fewer lawsuits. The whole idea is that if you force patents to be clear up front, you reduce the number of expensive, drawn-out legal battles over what the patent actually means down the road.
So if you only take one thing away from this explainer, make it this. The Nautilus case threw out the old, forgiving, insolubly ambiguous test. The new law of the land is that a patent's claims must define the invention with reasonable certainty for someone who's an expert in that particular field.
But this leaves us with a huge question for today's innovators. In fields like AI and biotech, where inventions are designed to learn and adapt, how do you define them with reasonable certainty? How do you put a clear fence around an invention that's constantly changing? That's the modern challenge that the Nautilus decision created for the future of patent law.